haaretz. Okay, so we're about to start a new mimer Shelach, Shelach before. Oh, I don't even have it up on my screen. Sorry, just 1 second, folks. I'll have to stop recording for a second to just a second, okay? Okay, here we go. So that should be. I'm just going to mute you for a minute. If you want, you can unmute yourself. Yeah, you can unmute yourself if you want to. I'm muting it now. I'm muting it now for recording purposes. So, okay. So in Pasha Shelach, let me share the screen so you can actually see the text. You can follow on your own text if you prefer, or I just want to put this text so you know where we are, basically. We have Daf Chof Ches in the original. Shelach Noshim. Okay, so Shelach Noshim Yasuris Eretz Canaan. Moshe Rabbeinu tells Hashem Kodesh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu Shelach Noshim. Send out people. The Yasuris Eretz Canaan, and they should spy out Eretz Canaan. Actually, interestingly enough, one of the, I think it's the Magalia Mukos, if I'm not mistaken, says if he would have sent women, you wouldn't have had all the problem with that you had with the Meraglim. So Hashem told him, Shlach lecha noshim. Maybe he sent noshim and not anoshim. Moshe Rabbeinu heard it wrong. I don't know. Anyway, in the Megala Amukri suggests that if he would have sent noshim, as we know, the noshim had a tremendous love and a chiba for Eretz Yisrael that apparently the Meraglim did not have. In any event, Shlach lecha noshim yasures Eretz Canaan. They should spy out Eretz Canaan. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu have to send Meraglim? Why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell him to send these Meraglim? Allah Klaus Indian creatures are Indian TV. It wasn't the whole conquering of the land of Israel not supposed to be a natural Indian. It wasn't Al Piteva. It was miraculous. The whole thing was miraculous. So what do you need spies for? To go spy out the land, if you need to find out the lie of the land and the people, as we'll see shortly, and what kind of cities they live in, and you got to do it b'derech hateva. But l'chayra, the whole Indian was ba'oifenisi. So why do we need it? Like, what would be the purpose of sending out spies? V'lama hayakol inyan shlichusam. Why did you have this whole union of shlichut? What for? When they would have conquered, if they would have conquered in a natural way, it would have been shaykh to send out spies to know the strengths and the strong and the weak points of the Medina that they're attempting to conquer, and what manner it would be best conquered. But it would be easiest to conquer it. About creatures of Eretz L'chayra, ain't no shaykh calls in. But when it comes to Eretz Yisrael, it's not shaykh with whole Yin, which was L'man min hateva. V'gam mahu inyan v'yasuru es haaretz. What's this whole concept of v'yasuru es haaretz? The word v'yasuru is a very strange word. Lo sasuru acharei levavchem v'acharei neichem. It says in Shema. Don't stray after your eyes. Why do they use this word stray? V'yasuru es haaretz. Should be Yeraglu Esaretz, from the word like rigul, which means to spy. Yasur Esaretz, Lama Ne'ema L'Ragel, Lama Lo Ne'ema L'Ragel Esaretz. It should have said spy out in the normal lotion. Why? By Yasuru. Like when the ones that Yeshua sent, they call Meraglim, not Tarim or Yasurim or whatever, right? Like Turis Aretz. Moshe Rabbeinu says to the spies, Gimel Dvarim Leroy's. There's 3 things you have to look at. 1, Aleph Es Ha'am. See what the people are like. Shalzeh Omar Uri'isem Es Haaretz Mahi. See the land, what it's all about, but it's not the land because the next words also say the land, so it must be a different Inyan. Rashi explains it's Yoshvei Haaretz, as we'll see. Takavone hi al Yoshvei Haaretz, K'mo shpirush Rashi Zal. Right, as Rashi had said. That's the first thing. So spy out the people. Beis Haaretz Atzmi. Check out the land itself. K'mo shekatu ma Haaretz. What kind of a land is it? Gimel, the third thing I have to look into is Ha'arim, the various cities, the towns in the city. Ma Ha'arim b'chulu. We have to understand what these three things are. Why it says ma haaretz mahi is yosh haaretz mahem and so on. Uma haaretz ma he'arim. Like what's this meaning of the ma that we just mentioned? Okay, so I'm sure everyone gets the bells bells and whistles are going off when you heard what the Loshen Ma is all about, but we'll see later on how he explains this. Having calls in order to be able to understand this, first of all, Yesh Lach B'Tchila, as we explained before, the oiros im pshutim, that even though the oiros of the esoteric like nuzois are oiros pshutim, they're pshutim, in other words, they're not they don't have the complexity of the spheroids down below from Olam Atzilus and below, but they're pshutim lagabe the Olamis. In other words, in comparison, they're relatively speaking oiros pshutim. Nevertheless, they have some kind of gvul. They have some kind of tziyur to the oiros. Again, the oiros im yosam pshutim. Nevertheless, and b'chinas pshitus mamish. The pshitus ein sof. They don't have the same pshitus as the Ein Sof. So compared with the Ein Sof, they're not so poshut. There's a tziyur to the oil, but compared with the oilemis below, oilam atzilus and below, there is afilu oilam of ak. They are called pshutim. Shar isa b'seif yitzira es spheros blima. So Yitzira talks about the spheroids blima. What does it mean blima? It means that they're pshutim. But they're not completely pshutim. They're not pshutim like the Ein Sof, but they have a certain pshitus to them. Shegam ba'oros yesh esed spheres. In the oros themselves, we have the Indian of esed spheres. Rak shehem bli ma legabe ha'kelim. Only what legabe the kelim they call bli ma. They call pshutim. When he's boyer, so we explained in the previous chapters, in the previous Maimon, the kaf, Moshe Kalbor, and so tzimtzum, yesh bo esed spheres. When esed spheres like gnuzos, the kaf before the tzimtzum also has an Indian of esed spheres. Not that the esed spheres are only spheres in kelim. There's an Indian in Hagbola, in a tziyur, in the oir, that could also be called spheres. Yes, it's not spheres with kelim, but it's an Indian of kelim. Even though it's not mamish kelim. The kelim only come after the tzimtzum. The esed spheres like gnuzois or in the or and sof before the tzimtzum. But nevertheless, it's a tziyur in the or, in a sense of hagbol. Shein shorish makor hagvul. The shorish makor hagvul, but which gvul? The gvul of the or, not the gvul of the kelim. The gvul of the kelim is the shorish of the gvul of the kelim is the rishimo. The shorish of the oraka of the gvul of the kav of the oiros is the kav. And the esed spheres like gnuzos. So, okay. And as far as this Indian is concerned, the kav is called Giloy HaHelem. But nevertheless, it's Ba'en Aroch. In other words, since Orein Sof is Pshitus Mamish, and since Orein Sof is Bligvu Mamish, therefore the kav, which is a Bechino HaGvu, Moeded Metidois, therefore the kav is Ba'en Aroch to the Orein Sof. Nevertheless, it's Giloy Helem Lagabe, the esed spheres like gnuzos, as we spoke about in the previous parak. Sorry about that. Just switch it off. Okay. So therefore, perhaps we could say, that it's mashma, it's apparent from that what Eitz Chaim is saying. It's mashma from the way the Eitz Chaim says it, that the kav could have remained. The Arizal asks the Havamina. It's only a Havamina in the Arizal. It's not the way he concludes, but he's a Havamina. Why was it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't remove all the rest of the cake, so to speak, and leave you the slice you wanted, right? You cut out the slice, you take the rest of the cake away, and you keep that for later. or you keep that for lasid lavoy, and just give me the slice. In other words, give me the kav and remove the rest of the oil. Why did there have to be tzimtzum b'derech siluk? That's his question. It could have been tzimtzum b'derech miyut. Remove the rest of the oil, but leave the oil of the kav. That's mashma from the question in that the Arizal himself asks. Again, shayayachol yois gilu or akav miblish yitzamtzem or vis alam betchila. Dinem Etz Chaim, Shar Aleph, Sof Anaf Gimel. It's not Shar Ayin Aleph, it's Shar Aleph, Sof Anaf Gimel. Hikshal Lama Haya HaTzimtum B'Oifen Kazeh. Why is it that the Tzimtum came about in this particular way? Shenistalek HaOr Lagamre. Why did the or have to be Nistalek Lagamre? And then you bring it back, V'chozav HaHeir. Right? Why was it that the or was Nistalek Lagamre, V'chozav HaHeir B'Oifen Shel Kav? And then he came back and he was and he illuminated with the or of the kav. You could have just removed most of the or and just left the or of kav. But it didn't work like that. And afterwards the kav was nimshach. The Chori could have just have removed the other oil and have left the kav. But the reason that HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't do it like that, obviously there's a reason for it, and we have to understand this reason. Okay. It's not understood. What's not understood? This question of the Arizal is not understood. Is it not explained in a number of different places in the Arizal himself? In order for there to be or that shaykh to Olamas HaTachtoinim, in other words, when we say Olamas HaTachtoinim, that includes Atzilus, Bria, Yitzira, Asiya. Hayatzarich Lio Siluk is almost or. There first had to be a complete Siluk, a removal of the Or Lagamre. There had to be. In other words, the Tzimtzum was not B'derech Miyut, as the Ramak thought it was. When the Ramak explained the meaning of Tzimtzum, he explained it in an open of Miyut, that there was originally an Or that was much greater, and there was a Tzimtzum was it was reduced. Right? Like, for instance, when you generate power. So you generate power in some kind of power station, and generates, I don't know what, 10 megawatts or whatever it is. I don't know how many megawatts it generates. Obviously, you can't plug your toaster into it or your kettle into it because it'll just blow it up. So they reduce the ore. They don't remove it completely and then come back with, just a completely different thing. But yeah, that's what happened. So again, his question is, it's mashma from the Arizal anyway, that there had to be a siluk v'is al musa or. Why? Because if you have the or habli gvul, you could never have the inyan of gvul. If the or habli gvul is mayor and a mute of the or, in other words, just reduced, taking away some of the or would still leave the or bebechinas bli gvul, because the or itself was bli gvul, and if you just remove some of it, the rest of the or is also going to be bli gvul. It doesn't change the mahusa or, it only changes the bit, somewhat of the metzius of the or. There's less of it than there was before. But it's still bligul. It's still Ein Sof. You can't, Ein Sof, it doesn't work like that you can sort of just reduce it. So we know that there had to be Histalkusa or there had to be a Siluk. There had to be the Tzimtzum in the way that we understand it, the Tzimtzum Arishon. So why is the Arizal even asking this question? We'll see. We can use the moshel of, as is often used in Hasidus, the hashpah of the Seichel HaRav and the Seichel HaTalmid. The Seichel HaRav, the way the Rav thinks of certain things by himself, in other words, in and of himself, for himself when he's learning by himself, and on Nikar Klala or Seichel HaShaychel HaMakabel. It's not shaykh to the Talmud at all. He's teaching first grade, right? And this is a Talmud Chochem and a great Rav, and he's teaching first grade, he's teaching Aleph Beis. Where can you see in the Seichel HaRav that he thinks about Aleph Beis? It's obviously he's way, way, way beyond that, and therefore he has to mitzamtzam his seichel. He has to stop thinking about things the way he thinks about them, and he has to think about it in terms of the Talmud. Otherwise, the Talmud will never be makabel anything. So there has to be a siluk. That's what the Moshel is telling us. The fact that the Rav has to malim, he has to conceal his or completely, as nivdal wa nikar or hashaychel makabel, then only is it possible to recognize the or that shaykh to a makabel. But if there is seichel of the Rav, if the Rav was thinking his own things, he wouldn't be able to communicate with the Talmud who's on a much, much lower level than he is, a first grader. He just wouldn't be able to do it. He can't think a complex shaila in Baba Kama and teach his kid reading skills at the same time. He has to stop thinking about what he's learning, unless he's got one of those brains that multitasks. But Bapashtus we're talking about, right? Bapashtus. Okay. In any event, so we understand, according to this, we understand that it would have been impossible to just leave some of the kav and remove the rest of the or. Leave the or of the kav behind and remove the rest of the or. It's not shaykh to say such a thing. So we could say, according to what we just explained, we could explain the result as follows. Since there's a shorish of the kav in the or ein sof before the tzimtzum, which is what? What's the shorish of the kav? The eses filis hagnuzois, v'hein eses filis hagnuzois, she'ein ze bechinas ha'atzmus the or ein sof, that the eses filis hagnuzois are not atzmus or ein sof. They're not etzem ha'or. They're or hashayich la'olemus. So since there's a shorish of the kav in the or ein sof itself already before the tzimtzum, but it's that aspect of the or ein sof which is called or hashayich la'olemus. Why can't he just remove? Now we can understand the question. Why couldn't he just remove etzem ha'or and or hashayich la'atzmoi and just leave the or hakav? In other words, the shorish of the or hakav, the eses filis hagnuzos. That's the question. So again, hein eses filis hagnuzos she'ein ze bechinas atzmus or ein sof habli gvul rak ma sheklulim bo or ein sof. It's only that the eses filis hagnuzos are klulim in the or ein sof. Ulegabe bechinas medrega zu or hakav bechinas gilo hahelem. And therefore, the kav is gilo hahelem of that. And therefore, you could say, l'chayra, why not remove the other or and just leave this or? And then the kav will be nimshach from the or, from the eses filis hagnuzos, but bechinas gilo hahelem. Imkain yistak akushia. Therefore, we can understand the question now. The question makes sense. Yistak akushia. Why it was that the or had to be removed completely. I'm sorry. We're talking the Havamina. Why, as the Arizal says, he asked the question, why is it that it had to be l'chayra, it didn't have to be? And now we can understand how it didn't have to be, because the shorish of the kav is in the eses filis hagnuzois, which is not the etzem ha'or, and therefore he could have just removed the etzem ha'or and the or shebigilul ha'atzmoi and left over the or hashayich la'olemus, and from that would have emerged the kav, and that justifies the question. Harei hamaspik she'is alem raka or shebechinas ein sof. It would have been sufficient to remove only the or ein sof, the or which is bechinas etzem ha'or, and the or shebigilul ha'atzmoi. V'yeshai or hakav nimshach me'eses filis hagnuzois, and then the or hakav would have been left over, which came from the eses filis hagnuzois. Shemor ein sof chulu. Now we understand the question. V'im lo haya tzimtzum klal, lo haya efshar liyos isgalus hakav. But if there was no tzimtzum at all, then the kav could not have been revealed at all. Because when the ora bligvul illuminates and the ora bligvul is mamale makom halal and unikar klal haor shebechinas gvul, it would not have been possible for the or shebechinas gvul to be recognized at all. One of the expressions in the Zohar is probably appropriate over here. A candle at noon, outside in the broad daylight. What's it going to add? What's it going to help him? It doesn't add any light, right? So the ora kav would not have been nikar if the ora bligvul was there. Okay. V'hainu the kasher ya gilu ora insof kodem hatzimtzum. When there was a gilu b'or ein sof prior to the tzimtzum, haya eses filis hagnuzos b'teilin lagamre b'or ein sof ablikvu. The eses filis hagnuzos were there, but they were bottled lagamre in or ein sof, and they weren't recognized at all. Why? Because b'chinas bli gvul, the inyan gvul, even if it's not gvul mamash, only tzir in the or, is not recognized. It's overwhelmed by the true nature of the or, which is bli gvul. Like the light of the sun in the sun itself, like a sun ray in the sun itself. You don't see the sun as a ray when it's in the sun. It's not called or, it's not called a ziv, right? It's not called a radiance from the sun. It's the sun because it's in there, and that's what it is. It's the radiant sun. There's no or and ziv as such. There's no ray of sun. As is written in Tanya, I think it's Berik Lamed Hay, and also in Shari Yichul Amuna, this Indian. Okay. Is almost an Ein Sof, and therefore there had to be the concealment of the Ein Sof. The concealment of the Ein Sof. In other words, there had to be the tzimtzum. In order for the Eses V'Yisagnuzes to be misgale. But again, we're talking about in the Havamina, in the Arizal's Havamina. Why was it? He's just explaining all this way along. The Rebbe Rashab was explaining the Havamina of the Arizal that l'choira, it would be enough to remove the oir, habligvul, and leave the or hashayich lo'olamis. In other words, the or that came out of the Eses V'Yisagnuzos behind, and that would have been the kav would have emerged from there. Okay, but it didn't work like that. We know. And the question was why. Okay, so again, his almusar. There had to be his almusar. His galusa eses v'zagnuzos. Was there yaspik would have been enough. His galusa kav me eses v'zagnuzos. It would have been enough if you just remove the ora bligvul and you leave over the eses v'zagnuzos from which the kav emerges. That would have been fine. L'choira. So we just explained how the Arizal's question is taka question. Okay. And now we have to understand why it didn't work like that. But he's just going to say now in the parentheses, he's going to say an interesting thing. Like the inyan koach hagvul in the Ein Sof, which leaves over the reshimo. After the koach hagvul, after the or is nistalik, it leaves over the reshimo. Shuhu hareshimo, that's the koach hagvul, is now manifested in the reshimo. Lo haya bazeh tzimtzum. There wasn't any tzimtzum per se in the koach hagvul. Rakshin is gala ala de tzimtzum or. It was left over after the tzimtzum or. Interestingly enough, the Rebbe Maharash in Sefer Mamorim Tafresh Mem has a ganza arichus on this inyan, Your Nasi B'Chag V'Asela, and I think the next two Mamorim, where he discusses this inyan at great length. The Rebbe Maharash was the first one to really get very deeply into this inyan of the Reshimo, and explains that there's a mile of the Reshimo over the Kav. Why? Because the Reshimo didn't really experience the tzimtzum in the same way. The tzimtzum for the Kav was siluka or masha. Enka, and the tzimtzum, as far as the Reshimo was concerned, was just miuta or. It wasn't siluka or. Right? So a very interesting thing, and if you want to look it up, I have it if you want to look over there in my Mishnah's Chabad about the Gabi the Rishima, the Gabi the Tzimtzum Rishon as well. In any event, that could have been the Gilo of the Orakav, like the Gilo of the Rishimo. Again, the Gilo of the Rishimo was not Siluka or, but was Miuta or. Right? Only those aspects of the or that were bleak vul were sort of removed from it, and the Rishimo remained. That's why it's called the Rishimo. And the same thing could have been with the Kav, at least in the Havamina. And now we have to understand why that was not the case. So why, therefore, was the or nistalek, was misalem, was completely removed, and then chazar v'heir, he once again brought back some or in order to illuminate it as the Kav, in order to make the Kav. All right, v'tiret sham, so the Arizal writes, so this is the beginning of Eitz Chaim. V'tiret sham, shezeu rak b'shvil his hausa kelim. This is for the purpose of kelim. Now, what do you mean? That's for the purpose of Kalim. He's going to explain. The Imaya Nishara or, because if the or would have remained, in other words, the or habligvul would have remained, afilu rak or a kav, even if it was only in the kav, which would have been, if there was no siluka or, but it was just a reduction, a mute in the or, it would simply have been the or hakav, the major or, the or habligvul would have been removed, leaving the or hakav behind. But if that would have been the case, if it would have been a tzimtzum b'derech mute and not a tzimtzum b'derech siluk, lo haya efshar liyosis havas kalim. The kalim could not possibly have survived in such a situation. Survive is not really the right word, but the kalim could not have come into being. They could not have existed had it not been for siluka or. If it would have just been mute or, the kalim would not have been produced. But the fact that the kav comes back and the kav is still an inyan in Orain Sof and it's davuk to the Orain Sof and therefore brings a degree of Orain Sof, even though it's a mute, lagay the Orain Sof that it was before the tzimtzum. But this doesn't now disturb the kalim. You might have thought it would bother the kalim, so to speak. The kalim would explode right from the or. The answer is they don't explode from the or, and why not? After the kalim have already been created from the rishimo, einam misbatlim, they're not nullified thereby by the or hakav, which is now nimshach into them. Gam keshenimshach bahem or vagilui. As is written elsewhere. I'm not sure where that elsewhere is, but I think it's actually in some of above. But we have to still understand. Tarigam amshoch zakav hu al der tzimtzum shayatchila. Amshoch zakav was, after all, via the tzimtzum. V'gam lefi hamashmos da Eitz Chaim, and even though, according to what we could have understood from the Eitz Chaim, shaya efshar be'efshar sheyeh yishayeh b'chinas hakav, it was possible just for the kav to remain by removing other aspects of the or besides the kav. Nevertheless, there was a tzimtzum even in the or hakav. Imkain, therefore, can you say that the kav is gilu hahelem? Gam mishor shemakoyroi. Since there was a tzimtzum, how can you call it gilu hahelem? It's not gilu hahelem. There must be some kind of gap between them. But he's going to explain. In other words, between the kav and its shorish. The concept is as follows: the lefi shittah. According to this shittah, is like nuzos and shorsha oirois, that the is like nuzos are the shorish of the or, not like the Ramak said that the shorish kalim, because the Ramak didn't have this whole inyan with the tzimtzum, lo yadami inyan tzimtzum, and therefore he didn't have the inyan of the rishimo either. Right? He didn't understand the rishimo the way that Arizal understood the rishimo, and therefore it's not in shittas Ramak. It's like nuzos and shorsha ha'oirois. According to us, it's shorsha oirish, it's not shorsha kalim. Misham nimshach hakav, and from there the kavi is drawn. Tzarich loymar the be'emes and adoma tzimtzum dora ein sof la tzimtzum shebeshorish makor hakav. The stalkus ha'or of the tzimtzum ha'rishon is not the same thing as the mute ha'or that brought about the kav from the esespirius like nuzos. Okay. We will see at greater length shortly. So previously we explained that the Ika Inyan of the tzimtzum was not for the sake of the or, but for the sake of the kalim. And the or came about through, after the tzimtzum, the chaz of a hayir. But it was the same or that was chaz of a hayir. The or that was nistalek is now the shorish hakav. The esespirius agnuzois, the or in the esespirius agnuzois, or at least the or surrounding the esespirius agnuzois, is the or that was in the halal and is now removed and becomes the igol agodl, and the kav is attached to the igol agodl. Okay, let's not get into it now because he's not going to get into it. But in any event, the or al here, therefore it was able to come into the kalim. Al koma tzimtzum b'chinas is almost mamish. But nevertheless, the tzimtzum harishon was b'chinas is almost. This that there was a tzimtzum mamish, the ike inyan of the tzimtzum al piashita dam shochas akav mo'orin sof mamish. Right. So according to the shittah that the kav is from the Or Ein Sof itself and not from the Eses Friz Agnuzes and not from the Or that was Nistalek. So, Al Pishita Zu, Am Shochas Akav, Hum Or Ein Sof Mamish. Al Korchach, therefore, Tzarech Liyoso, Al Kain, Tzarech Liyoso, the Tzimtzum Lagamer Akav, Gam Ken Bechinas Siluk Viz almost Lagamre. Also has to be Bechinas Siluk Viz almost. In other words, if the Or of the Kav is Or Ein Sof, so it's not possible for the Or HaKav to be Bechinas Kav hamoided medidois. The chitzonis of the kav is called moided medidois. It measures out the or lefi, the erech of the kalim that it's going to go into, and the oilimus that it's going to go into. This would not have been possible if the shorish of the kav was or ein sof. Even this shittah says that there had to be histalkus haor. There had to be the inyan of the tzimtzum harishon. And in other words, he's almost legamre. Hayab b'chinas gamken b'chinas siluk. He's almost legamre. Rak sham shochas hakavu adesh or chazav ha'ir. There had to be his talkus or and then chazav ha'ir. He returned and illuminated the light of the kav again afterwards. Okay. Ulefish shorish sham shochas ma'ora bligvu. And since the shorish of the hamshach of the kav is the ora bligvul, shechazav ha'ir, that once again came back to illuminate. Even though it jumps over, so to speak, the separation of the tzimtzum harishon. In other words, the siluk. Like the hairs of the head are nimshach, even though the hairs of the head, well, let's put it this way. The hairs of the head themselves are not from the brain, at least in most people. Yeah? At least in most people, the hair of the head is not from the brain. But the oil that goes down the hair of the head, the oil that travels down the hair of the head is said to come from the brain. That's why, well, from the inyan of chokhmah in the brain in particular, right? The inyan of shemen, razin doraisa, is always the inyan of the oil at its highest madrega. Why? Because shemen is what we use to light candles, right? It's what we use to light candles, and therefore it's shaykh to the inyan of oil. In any event, the oil that goes down the hair is nimshach. It's said to be nimshach from koach chokhmah, but from chokhmah within the brain. But nevertheless, it travels somehow or another via the skull, right? So there's a hefsek hagugoyles. The skull intervenes. So there's a hefsek of some sort, but nevertheless, the inyan of chokhmah is nimshach via the hair and past the gulgoyles, past the skull. Okay, this is what he's giving. This is just emotional, and he explains it. And the kav, just like the hair, what's in the hair is the oil from chokhmah. So too, the Or Ein Sof is me'en ha'ma'or. It's like the Or Ein Sof before the tzimtzum. The Or Ein Sof in the kav is davuk and nogea b'Or Ein Sof. Somehow or another, even though there's a hefsek, there's a dilug, nevertheless, it's nogea and davuk b'Or Ein Sof, and hu me'en ha'ma'or, and it's like the inyan of the ma'or, just like the oil has its shaykhs to chokhmah. And the reason for it is as follows: gam dveikus kazu, kedveikus hasarois al derech moshel, mastik liyosa orma en amoir. It's enough for the or to be me'ein hamaor, in other words, for the or itself to also be bebechinas bligvul, for the or itself also to be bebechinas bligvul, because it's davuk in the or ein sof. It has, it touches, it has a connection to its nogeya, to the or ein sof, and therefore it takes upon itself the quality. It's me'ein hamaor. It's like, it's not the maor, but it's me'ein hamaor. It's like the maor in the sense that it has this inin of bligvul. Right? So it must be, because if sufficient, even though there's the gulgoilis intervening, there's the skull intervening, or in our case, there's the tzimtzum harishon that intervenes, nevertheless, it must be for the or to be like the maor, in other words, bebechinas bligvul. Why is it sufficient? Because ultimately the or of the kav is still ein sof. It was Ein Sof initially. And therefore, even though there's a tzimtzum, and even though it has to come about b'derech dilug, nevertheless, it retains that aspect. It retains the aspect of or Ein Sof. Just like, I don't know if you can, it's a bit of a chutzpah to give this this example, but just like the children of Kedoshim, Al Kedosha Elyon, also called Kedoshim. In other words, Zera Berach Hashem, right? There's, these are the, it's the Zera which Hashem blessed, even though it's another generation. It comes out of the womb, it's a different generation, but nevertheless, there's the Shtaushulus of the Koiches from one tzaddik to another. I don't know if we can use that moshel, but it seems to me that it's a moshel which is useful. In any event, that from the Orient of itself, gam ha'ora haba b'derech dilug, even if it's not the Orient of mamish, it's only ha'ora of the Orient of, and it comes about b'derech dilug. Nevertheless, hilamala ba'en aroch me'amshocha d'seidi shtalshlus shebeseder v'hadroga is much higher than seidi shtalshlus, which comes about in an orderly and a stepping down kind of a manner, and that inyan of Orient Sof, which is in the Kav, is Lamana Ba'in Aroch from Seidish Shtalshlus. Even though it's part of the Seidish Shtalshlus, is also from the Atzbus Ha'or, etc. That is Mishtalshal down. The or, the ha'ora of the kav is also Ein Sof. Why is the ha'ora of the kav Ein Sof? Because it's nogeya and davuk in the or Ein Sof before the tzimtzum. V'hainu lefi sheba'amshoch shebederet dilug yesh gam ken k'tzas deveikus. There is a little bit of dveikus, not the dveikus that it had initially, which was completely bottled, but it's davek in the sense that it's sufficient to make it me'en ha'ma'or. Because if there would not be any dveikus, then it wouldn't be called oir. Because oir has to have a makor. And what's the makor of the or? The or Ein Sof, that was nistalik and is the cause of a hair and so on and so forth. It's nogay in the or Ein Sof from before the tzimtzum. Because otherwise it wouldn't be or at all. If there was no dveikus of the kav in the or Ein Sof, then there wouldn't be any, the kav would not have any or in it. The imlav kain lo hayav b'chinas or, the kav would not be a madrega of or at all. It would be darkness. B'chinas ha'or b'li gvul, harizeh b'chinas dveikus. So when it comes to the or Ein Sof b'li gvul, there's b'chinas dveikus. Yos ha'or gam ken b'chinas Ein Sof. There is an aspect of dveikus, and therefore the or of the kav is b'chinas, the premise of the kav is b'chinas Ein Sof. Zeu sha'akav gam shnikra mazel. Even though the kav is called mazel, which is why we compared it to a hair, because a hair in Aramaic is called mazle, right? His hair, mazle, mazal, right? Possibly because it's noizel, because oil flows down it, but whatever, it's still called mazle. That's why it's like the Indian of the hair, which is called mazle in Aramaic. Nevertheless, it's connected, right? The hair itself is not connected. That's the chitzonius, but the pnimis is connected. All of that were what we just said. It was la shittah sham shochasoy me'orens of obliqu. That's if we argue that the shorish of the kav is in the orens of obliqu. But that's not what we're arguing over here. Here we're talking about the Orein Sof, about the Kav being coming from the Eses Rizak Nuzois, which is already Bechinas Tziur and Bechinas Gvul in the Or. So it's we don't have to go through that whole argument that we just went through. ולפי המבואר כאן, לשיטה הנ"ל, דשורש הקו הוא מהאסס ריזק נוזויס, אין ארוך הצמצום, אין עניין הצמצום דומה זה לזה. The Indian of the tzimtzum of the kav is not the same as the tzimtzum harishon. The tzimtzum of the kav, in other words, the tzimtzum of the kav is the b'chinas miyut. It's not the b'chinas siluk. It was first the Indian of siluk, and then there's the Indian of miyut. All right, two different inyonim. Okay, so he's going to explain. The tzimtzum shaya ba'orein so b'chinas siluk, which is almost legamre. Masha'ing ba'tzimtzum b'shorosh makor hakav is b'chinas miyut. And it's not the Indian of the tzimtzum harishon, which is b'chinas siluk. Okay, kitzur. והנה המשמעות העץ חיים, זה גילו הקו, גם מבלי שיש אלמון לגמרי. According to the question in the Eitz Chaim, it's possible for the kav to be left over without the or having to be removed completely. Muvan al pi hanal, so we can understand according to this, that the kav has a shorish. In other words, the fact that it's not like that, and there had to be the or itself, there had to be a siluka or, as we just explained it. So we understand from this that the kav has its own shorish in the or Ein Sof. What's that shorish? It's the shorish of, it's the Eses Rizak Nuzois in the or Ein Sof hashayach lo'olimus. Muvan al pi hanal sheyesh lakav shorish miyuchad b'fnei atzmo v'hein Eses Rizak Nuzois, as we said. When the or Ein Sof was meir, when it illuminated, then the Eses Rizak Nuzos were not nikar. Once the or Ein Sof is removed, then the Eses Rizak Nuzos are nikar, and the kav can be nimshach. In kanayim aspik she's alem raka or Ein Sof. According to this shittah, it would be enough that the or Ein Sof would be nis alem and not nistalek. But the tirutz is why it wasn't like that. Why it was, in fact, that the or was, in fact, nistalek. It's not for the sake of the or akav. The or akav could have been just fine with the siluka or, with the siluka or abligvu, and we left the or agvu of the Eses Rizak Nuzois. But why then was there a siluka or? Why was the tzimtzum harishon the tzimtzum harishon? Why was there siluka or lagamre? For the sake of his havus kelim. Otherwise, it couldn't have been kelim. That's the problem. And even though there is an inyan of tzimtzum in the kav itself, there's a different kind of tzimtzum. In the shittah zu, the shorish hakav is according to the shittah that the kav does not come from the or Ein Sof, but rather from the Eses Rizak Nuzois. Tzimtzum b'shvil hakav urak b'chinas miyut. The tzimtzum the kav is b'chinas miyut and not b'chinas diluk, not b'chinas his almus. I'm sorry, not b'chinas siluk is the word I'm looking for. All right. Any questions, Rabbi Isai? Let's see. Oh, someone was in the waiting room. I don't know. Sorry, we just finished. I didn't see you in the waiting room all this time. And, oh well, sorry about that. Well, it was recorded, so. All right, are there any questions? Type it in the chat or switch on your mic and you can talk. My apologies. I do try and start on time. I started a few minutes late, but I didn't see there was someone else still in the waiting room. Once I'm recording and I'm on the other screen, it doesn't give me a notification. Probably should, but it doesn't. So, again, my apologies. All right. Okay, so there don't seem to be any questions. We'll leave it at that. I will post it at Hasidus Decoded on YouTube. Just look for that channel, Hasidus Decoded, and it will be posted there. Okay, good night, everybody. See you next week, Blessed Hashem. Unless there's questions. No questions? Everyone's sleeping already? All right.